Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie. We really appreciate you and the NOAA Central Library partnering with NOAA Pride on this webinar today and bringing it all together for us. So thank you again. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. My name is Lucas Johansson. I use he, him pronouns, and I am one of the NOAA Pride co-chairs along with Josh Jankot. I'm just going to kick us off today with a quick introduction into NOAA Pride, the NOAA Employee Resource Group, or ERG, that's focused on the needs of the NOAA LGBTQ+ community and its allies. So NOAA Pride is a resource for managers and staff in any issue or topic affecting LGBTQ+ employees. At NOAA, we promote the employment, advancement, and retention of persons regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Our current organizational structure consists of a 15-person executive committee with myself and Josh Jankot as co-chairs, as I mentioned. We also have a secretary position that currently is vacant. So any of you who are in NOAA, we'd love to have you join us. So feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in joining the executive committee. In addition to the executive committee, our executive sponsor is Nicole LaBeouf, the assistant administrator for the National Ocean Service. And Nicole has been an incredible advocate and ally. She's our voice with NOAA leadership and is always helping advance our NOAA Pride work. And so thank you to Nicole. And Michelle Moore is an EEO diversity specialist with the NOAA Office of Inclusion and Civil Rights. And Michelle acts as the special emphasis program manager for NOAA Pride and the LGBTQ+ community at NOAA. And she is an incredible ally as well. And in addition, NOAA Pride Chair and Co-Chair are also members of a group called the Diversity and Inclusion Management Advisory Council, or DMAC as it's known. That's a group that brings together the chairs of our all of our NOAA ERGs and affinity groups. So we've been working hard the past few years in NOAA Pride, developed a lot of NOAA Pride resources, becoming a resource on topics relating to our community, advocating for our community, and educating the larger NOAA and federal workforce about topics relating to the LGBTQ+ community. So you can see here a few of our 2023 priorities, including the launch of the third cohort of the NOAA Pride Mentoring Program this spring. In addition to continuing to offer our Straight Allies Toolkit presentation and pronouns and gendered language presentation, we'll be working to create a bystander intervention training that's focused specifically on the LGBTQ+ community. And we're always looking to attend and develop events, including social events, producing and sharing informational events such as this one. And we hope to attend and participate in STEM and LGBTQ+ focused recruitment events, such as the Out in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math conference that we attended last year. And we'll continue to collaborate with other NOAA and Department of Commerce ERGs and DEIA groups, as well as other federal ERGs and groups such as Pride and Federal Service, which connects groups across the government. And we're also working on documenting the name change process at NOAA. That's a collaborative effort with the Women of NOAA ERG and the National Weather Service. We're also continually searching for and creating resources we think are helpful. I'm not going to cover this slide too much, as those of you who are outside of NOAA won't be able to access our internal NOAA Pride website, unfortunately. I do want to mention to those of you in NOAA that we added a new topic section today in relationship to this webinar, and it's a topic-based resource section on our resources page that highlights resources for LGBTQ+ families, prospective parents, and parents of LGBTQ+ children. If you are searching for resources, if you can't access our website, you can feel free to reach out to me or to NOAA Pride. We're always happy to share what we have, or you can also reach out to your agency's ERG for resources and support as well. So that's all I have on NOAA Pride today. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, lucas.johansson at noaa.gov, or our co-chair Josh, or to the NOAA Pride Executive Committee at noaapridexcom@noaa.gov. And now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Darren Paul-Vance. So Darren joined Rainbow Families as the executive director in 2018. He, his husband, John, and their now teenage son had been members for years. And as parents, they found value in the services, resources, and community connections provided. A Los Angeles transplant, Darren previously served as a board member and development director of the Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles, who was Speakers Bureau Director with Love and Feeding Everyone, and worked extensively with Project Angel Food. And here in Washington, DC, he is an active member of the DC LGBTQ Leaders Group, the DC Queer Space Coalition, and volunteers with the Catalogue for Philanthropy. So thank you very much, Darren, for bringing this important information to us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Lucas, thanks so much. I appreciate the introduction, and it's great to be here. I am thrilled with the number of attendees that we have here, and I'm also just so impressed with your NOAA Pride and your ERG work that you do. It's really commendable. So I'm going to go ahead and get right to it. I will tell you that I have some notes on my screen that I will have to follow. If not, we're going to be here for about 4 hours, and I know none of you want that. So I'm going to go off my notes here, but I am looking forward to having your questions that we'll have towards the end. I'd like to just chat a little bit about Rainbow Families. Let me back up and say my pronouns are he, him, his, by the way. I'd like to chat just a bit about Rainbow Families. We are a 40-year-old nonprofit. Actually, some of our work goes back to the 1970s. And there have been a lot of changes over the years, obviously, in that amount of time. But today, we offer support groups. We offer classes such as Maybe Baby, which is our Prospective parenting course. We do an annual family conference, which, by the way, is May 20th of this year, and really incredible opportunities to connect, like picnics and play dates and a camping weekend, for example. It's one of our most cherished events. It's where our families, especially our kids, are together with absolute celebration and no need to code shift or explain or worry about being othered. Those types of programs not only benefit the kids, but they're great for our parents as well. And lately, we've done several legal chats to help us navigate some of the changes that have happened in our legislative system over the last couple of years. And we're super proud of the support groups that I mentioned. We typically have had 3 different monthly support groups. We're now working on our 9th support group to let people share and grow from one another on a host of topics like new parenting, even divorce and separation, trans parenting, and non-gestational parent support group, all sorts of wonderful, wonderful programs. And I invite you to look at our website to see some of the different things that we do offer. Rainbow Families is really important because the reality, sadly, is that people across the country just don't have resources or a roadmap to LGBT familyhood. These resources and tools are needed for not only creating family, but having our healthy, happy families. And where there are those opportunities, it's kind of tough to know who is trustworthy, who is truly affirming, or did they merely place a rainbow sticker on their website and they're happy to take your credit card number. We are a lean nonprofit. We rely on incredible volunteers. In fact, we only have 2 full-time employees. Everything else we do is handled through, like I said, these great volunteers and our volunteer board of directors. LGBTQ families are everywhere, in the smallest of rural Midwest communities to big metro regions. There are over 1 million same-sex couples in the US, as reported from 2019, so that number has certainly grown. And roughly 15% of those families had at least one child under 18 in their household. And that's compared with about double the number of opposite sex couples. And I think that's huge. And I think it's worth celebrating. According to UCLA Law School in 2006, that number was 20,000. And here we are approaching 200,000 LGBTQ headed families. You heard a bit about my journey to parenthood. My husband and I adopted our incredible teenage kid at birth from Guatemala. At the time, we lived in Virginia, where it was illegal for two people of the same gender to adopt. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. He's the light of our lives. I will say that both John and I wish we knew about rainbow families at that time, because we were completely taking stabs in the dark. We were lucky. We found, a great adoption agency, and someone kind of referred us to a good attorney and things like that. But it was a really daunting, frightening process. So I want to talk pretty much, about 3 different topics today. What family creation in the LGBTQ community looks like today. Then I want to touch a bit on some of the legal things that are going on right now, and things that, especially as LGBT parents and families, we need to really be aware of. And then last, I really am thrilled that I was asked to include this today, is to chat about celebrating our kids regardless of how they identify. And I love the use of the word celebrating instead of accepting. Accepting is kind of a hot button for me. That still portends something lesser than. So we're going to talk about celebrating our families and our kids. So family creation for LGBTQ folks and the preparations and options and like that. I can tell you that the very first thing that I tell prospective queer parents is to find a trusted LGBTQ competent family planning attorney to begin the journey. We'll talk a bit about why in the next segment. I also think it's really important to mention intentionality. In our community, we do not have oops babies. We tend to be jealous at the very least of, kids who can make a baby at halftime at a football game. And, to create family for us takes tremendous planning, tremendous expense, and intentionality. The process has also changed a lot, even from the time my own family was created. Until maybe 15 years ago, most gay men created their families through international adoption. But still, even back then, 2 men weren't allowed to adopt. So, like as in my case, one parent was the official legal parent. And that made the other parent the roommate or the business partner or the family friend. Suffice to say, that was disempowering and demeaning, just to name a few. It's another testament, though, to how much gay people will go through simply to have a family. And thankfully, in the United States, it's no longer this subversive act, especially for adoption, with exception of some faith-based adoption services who will not allow us to adopt because we're not worthy. But laws have caught up with adoption, and of course, we're very thankful for that. And also today, most countries have closed their doors to gay parents seeking to adopt. So that really has shifted the focus more back to domestic infant adoption. Women people assigned female at birth certainly have biological advantages and have been creating families with sperm donors for years. And that has ranged from at-home insemination with candles and very very home-based, to going through sophisticated fertility routines and specialists. That fertility, or rather the technology, also known as assisted reproductive technology or ART, has grown leaps and bounds, especially in the last 5 or 6 years. We have sperm screening and genetics testing, egg storage, sperm storage, intrauterine insemination. Sperm and eggs can be FedExed around the world. In fact, all of this has become really big business, and it's available pretty much everywhere. The problem, of course, is when companies see dollar signs, they tend to not offer the services that our community especially needs and deserves. It's also interesting that today many more gay men are pursuing ART using a surrogate, egg donor, et cetera, instead of going the adoption route. And that's pretty new. And it's also for a variety of reasons, 2 of which would be that it can include a shorter waiting time and also wanting to be genetically linked to their child. Assisted reproductive technology is not cheap. Depending on the circumstances, it can range from $50,000 to well over $100,000. And then that's when your thoughts go back to the kids at the football game. There's also potential loss, the grief of losing an egg transfer or having a birth mother change her mind 4 days after the baby is born, or a foster child in your care being reunified with their family, just as with the straight community. But for gay people, this grief often goes unrecognized or dismissed. In our own family building process, we had not 1, but 2 surrogates who ultimately could not carry for us due to medical reasons. And we also had an international adoption fall through at the very last minute. It was horrific. And at some point we thought, well, maybe this just isn't meant to be. What we also noticed is that even the most well-meaning of people just didn't seem to get it. In fact, one of our support groups now that I created from my own personal experiences is that we have a grief and loss through family planning support group. I'm also told that many people in the medical profession are dismissive of pregnancy loss in general, but even more so with our community and pregnancy loss. Domestic infant adoption continues to be still about the largest avenue for family creation, especially for gay men, people assigned male at birth. And last year, there were approximately 150,000 adoptions in the United States across the board. And that's 12,000 a month, which I think is really fantastic. Wait times. During COVID, it was pretty terrible, the wait time for a domestic infant adoption. And in fact, many of the really good adoption agencies completely stopped taking new prospective parents. We've kind of rebuilt back to somewhat of normal, and wait times here can vary from 8 to 9 months on up to 2 years. The sad thing is that whenever I say 8 to 9 months on up to 2 years, most people hear 8 to 9 months. The reality is that it often can be 18 months or more. Costs for adoption, they range deeply based on the type of services that you use, the marketing that is used when you create these books, practically Steven Spielberg, video productions to reach out to people who are considering giving up their child for adoption. So in that area, you're looking today about $40,000 on up, probably an average closer to 60. One option, so important and has essentially zero cost, is creating family with an older child. There are 500,000 children in foster care right now in the United States, and that is staggering, and it is gut-wrenching. These are infants all the way up to 21-year-olds who just want and deserve a loving home. These children often, but not always, have special needs, perhaps a medical issue or some learning challenges. And in every case, they have experienced some trauma. Sadly, no child ends up in foster care if they had a wonderful, healthy childhood. But foster care providers are given tons of support, counseling, respite care, legal assistance at no cost. They even receive monthly stipends and medical insurance for the child and a lot more. Within Rainbow Families, we have several families that have been created through foster care, and they're just amazing. One family in particular, they adopted 4 children out of DC foster care. And one of them, they were told, your child will basically never walk, and your child is so traumatized that they may really not have a happy, independent life. This kid is a young teenager now and is so active and so wonderful and is involved in volunteer work. And certainly that's not the story with everyone, but there are so many more stories like that that are just beautiful. Foster care providers give a child structure, even through mentoring, not just necessarily having them live in your home, but they give a child to be around a healthy, happy family environment. Even if permanent adoption is not a part of that child's journey, it really, really can make a life or death difference in a child's life. It's important to note that the gay community also has consistently, over the years, made up a huge percentage of people who provide loving families for children in foster care. One family services case manager once told me years ago, and it has stuck with me ever since. She said, our gay parents love these kids that other people don't want. For LGBTQ people, it's vital to have resources such as Rainbow Families for education and support, and connections to truly competent affirming service providers, pediatricians, schools, places of worship, even daycare providers. That really is so important. And to connect with other LGBTQ families, to be certain that your child has numerous opportunities to be around other families like theirs. It sounds obvious, but children must have this for healthy development and to be strong in their sense of self and identity, and frankly deal with some of the issues that can arise. For example, coming out to classmates as having 2 moms. We often think about how we as parents are affected by the outside world, and without realizing or meaning to, it's easy to sometimes get lost in where our kids are at and really helping navigate that for them in healthy and positive ways. I want to talk about intersectionality too. For white parents with kids of color, just like my family, it is vital to do work in this field and even have some uncomfortable or challenging conversations. It can be tough to address our own biases and the biases of our family members and those around us, our colleagues, etc. You think about things like your neighborhood. Who are your inner circle of friends? How will you work to actively encourage and support your child's heritage, their connections to first family, even as they differ from your own? It's parenting, and it is about what's best for your child. And it also doesn't detract from the wonderful traditions and culture in your own family that you'll want to, of course, share with your family. Just as short as a few years ago, this was completely swept under the rug. It was for us, unfortunately, for the comfort of the parent and to help them feel less threatened, especially when it comes to things like relationships with the first family, otherwise known as biological family. So much research has been done to prove how open adoptions, appropriate open adoptions, with dialogue and just openness can dramatically improve the emotional health and the feeling of security and well-being for the child. The research is completely proven too that even the best, most well-adjusted, loving families, adoption involves some degree of trauma for the child. And again, it's important to really be aware of this. And I always say that a good queer affirming counselor can make the world of difference in helping you kind of navigate this with your child. Thinking of things like, who does your child see as representation of who they are? Are they the only child of color living in a fully white neighborhood? Do white parents make the effort to learn about the importance of Black hair care even? LGBTQ parents, especially, or parents of an LGBTQ child, must carefully consider how they'll react to, as I like to say, the questions in the checkout line at the grocery store or at the playground. Do we use those opportunities to inform and to build bridges, or do we instinctively go into Papa Bear mode and fire away? And I admit to feeling the whole gambit of those inclinations. Clearly, there's a difference between people who are genuinely wanting to learn and asking a question versus an attack, and we have to know the difference and be prepared in advance, not at the moment, of how we're going to react and respond. But regardless of how we react and we respond, our children, even very young children, are always observing. Our responses and our behaviors tell that child if there is something inherently wrong with our family that needs to be duked out. And I think that's really important for us to bear in mind. And finally, I tell people to surround themselves with celebration of the beauty of their families, the beauty of being different. Sadly, it seems like being different is becoming more and more of a hot button. Now, our kids might not be comfortable if you, in an effort to really celebrate, as gay parents, you have a 6-foot-long rainbow streamer attached to the back of your car when you're dropping them off at the first grade drop-off line at school. But showing our children and our communities in our neighborhood that beautiful, our beautiful families, we're normal, we're amazing, we're flawed, we're imperfect, and that's okay, and that's the better for everyone. I want to talk now about legal challenges and considerations. And the most important caveat here is that none of this should be taken as legal advice. I am not an attorney, and I will say that Rainbow Families does have resources to several trusted queer affirming lawyers if you'd like any of those references. We have seen great strides in legally protecting the rights of our families, but we still face discrimination. And in the last few years, that's increasing. Transgender parents in particular still today lose custody of their children at alarming rates simply because of their gender. And this blows my mind to know that over 300 anti-LGBTQ bills were introduced last year. Across the country, libraries are being forced to remove wonderful books about diversity and inclusion. It comes to mind for me, And Tango Makes Three. It was one of our favorite family bedtime books. It's about penguins. In certain areas, teachers fear criminal prosecution for even acknowledging a student who happens to mention their two dads or their two moms. So why do I recommend a competent LGBT attorney as the first step for family planning? Well, part of that parenting journey is to ensure that your family is protected legally, just as we would ensure that our family is well fed and housed and cared for. In our community, this is really even more vital because there are risks and there are growing legislative threats to our rights to familyhood. There are a lot of hoops to jump through and necessary protections. Some of them are kind of obvious and others really kind of go deep into the weeds. For example, I regularly receive questions like, we're both on the birth certificate, so we're legally covered, right? Or my wife carried our baby with my cousin's sperm. She and I are married, so our child is mine too, right? Or even in that same scenario, we didn't need a lawyer. We didn't want to have to spend all that money. My cousin doesn't want to be involved and he'll never ask for child support or anything like that. And by the way, he's not on the birth certificate, so he doesn't have rights. And the answer is he has rights without proper steps, very pointed proper steps put in place. What if 5 or 10 years down the line, that cousin suddenly becomes anti-LGBT or doesn't agree with their parenting style? Without this protection, he could go to court. I will also share with you that every time my family travels, even just out-of-state road trips, we carry copies of our son's birth certificate, his citizenship, our adoption paperwork, even our marriage license. We often forget how different we look to the outside world. We have a Latin teenager, an Asian Pacific Islander husband, and then practically transparent super white me, all three of whom are gay. There's still some legitimate fear. So again, all this talk of threats to familyhood, I've covered some of it. If you look at social media, it's easy to see so many out and proud LGBT people and families. But you've also certainly heard about judicial changes at state and federal levels. Plus, we are now this new target to rile up political bases. Queer rights are on the line for sure. And people who are trans or gender non-conforming are especially in the bullseye right now. It's terrifying. The problem is these are just real people wanting to live their lives, and their lives are threatened and sadly ended at a shocking rate. And I know that's tough to hear, but it's important to remember this. Not even a year ago, the Supreme Court took away citizen rights for the very first time. Without getting into a discussion on Roe, it's important in this context for its further reaching impact, gay marriage. There are a few, but there is a Texas state lawsuit that claims, all right, gay people got the right to call themselves married. However, gay people did not get the right to the benefits of marriage. And so this suit essentially says, you can call yourselves married, but that's it. No benefits, no protections. And this case is headed to the Supreme Court. And the reality is that Justices Thomas and Alito seem primed to tackle gay marriage using the same argument that was used in the Roe decision, that gay marriage isn't specifically mentioned in the Constitution. Some legal experts agree that, at some point, the list will include making it either illegal or just making it so challenging and logistically impossible for legal LGBTQ parenthood, kind of going back 20 years or so. Both this and marriage are kind of in a holding pattern right now. That's tough because, quite honestly, we don't have a lot of answers today. We will, especially with the next cycle of elections. One overlooked area is the new attention given to assisted reproductive technology, especially as a result of the Supreme Court decision. This is where it kind of goes into the weeds a bit. Sperm donors, freezing eggs, disposing of unused eggs, donating unused eggs. This is all under the microscope of politicians and judges. Here's another instance where an attorney is vital to do everything possible right now to protect and guide the process. And absolutely, there are some legal experts that say this is coming. We're headed back underground. We're creating, family, like I said, goes back, the way it was 20 years or more. We're owning joint property or visiting your spouse or child in the emergency room. Custody rights, estate planning, and more will require at least tremendous extra effort, cost, and legal maneuvering. The good news is that others say we have reason to hope that these extreme measures won't come to pass, particularly with marriage. First, it's impossible to predict the courts, but second, with marriage, to undo an enduring, multi-layered public institution that has now been around for many years, like gay marriage, it's celebrated by huge institutions and loads of money goes into the US economy due to gay marriage and taxes. Doing something like this would represent a political and logistic nightmare. So that's one hope, is that the ramifications of doing something like that would just fail miserably. Roe was an easier target because it's less public, it's less talked about, it's more single focused, and that many people say that was kind of the litmus test for other legal maneuvers. And, for gay marriage, it is interesting to note that, in 2015, when the Supreme Court gave us the right to be married, we celebrated, absolutely, as we should. But as a community, we fell asleep at the wheel, knowing that gay marriage was the law of the land, which it still is today, and that it was set in stone forever. Where we fell asleep was not worrying about those existing states with laws on the books that prohibit gay marriage in those states. And that's kind of like a light bulb moment that if Obergefell, which is the Supreme Court case that awarded us the right to marry, if that is overturned, it would be as easy as flipping a light switch in those states, and gay marriage would be gone in many states. More than 70% of Americans say that gay marriage should be legal. And in 2022, last year, we saw the passage of the Respect for Marriage Act, thankfully. While this was an important safeguard, it gave nearly 600,000 couples a sigh of relief, but it is not comprehensive. One key issue is that anti-LGBTQ laws in conservative states could undercut the Respect for Marriage Act. And the act also provides an exemption for religious nonprofits. And then there's the looming question, would a new president and/or Congress overturn this important act? If you're in a metropolitan area like DC or New York or LA, of course, you're in a bit of a safety bubble. And that's good and bad, because even in those safety bubbles, it's short-sighted to just assume that we're fine and kind of stick our heads in the sand. Virginia is a great example. We often forget that beyond Northern Virginia is a whole different state with a whole different set of opinions on things like LGBTQ rights. There were 12 anti-LGBTQ bills proposed in Virginia. Virginia Beach banned books with any LGBT content. It was overturned by a state court judge, thankfully, but it did exactly what they'd hoped. They prepared it to go to the Supreme Court. Some of you may live in Loudoun County, Virginia, another DC suburb. And the Virginia governor signed into law in April of 2022 a bill to notify parents about sexually explicit materials, which, as a parent myself, seems perfectly reasonable. But these laws are written all over the country in very pointedly vague manner to allow even references to homosexuality being deemed obscene and therefore not allowed. And don't say gay in Florida. I won't even get into that. Just to say that a reminder, there were over 300 anti-LGBTQ bills filed in the last year. So some suggestions. Never arbitrarily sign an agreement or a contract that's put in front of you. Get appropriate, competent counsel. These, things like a surrogacy agreement or IVF or egg donation, sperm donors, custody, all of that. LegalZoom and boilerplate wills and estate plans just don't cut it. And many good attorneys and estate plan people and financial experts who are very well-meaning, but they may not be truly aware of the nuances and the degree to which we need protection. You think about what happens if a relationship is involuntarily ended, meaning death of a spouse, where the other spouse produced eggs which are currently frozen. What happens in that case? And are people going to be going to battle over your family's eggs? These terms have to be really carefully spelled out, perhaps now more than ever. So there's hopefully zero room for contradiction if laws change. Another thing to ask your experts about is that many lawyers suggest a revocable trust. They tend to be more private. They're only viewed by the creators, the authors, and the recipients. And what I hear is that you can change the governing jurisdiction if needed down the road to a state that still recognizes gay marriage. Again, check that with your experts, but I've just heard that not too long ago. Adoption. Get a court order. We are fortunate in the United States. We have something called the Full Faith and Credit Act. It's one of the oldest laws in our nation. And it says that one state must recognize a judgment from another state. Your marriage, your adoption, child support, custody agreements. A court order is the gold standard for protection. Nothing other than a court order. Why? A birth certificate doesn't necessarily convey parental rights, parentage. Neither does a marriage certificate. I've been advocating for something called a second parent adoption for years. It's also sometimes called a step parent adoption. It's critical now. Even along these lines, a person who gives birth is the legal parent, even with someone else's eggs. You need a pre-birth decree that everyone agrees, hopefully before that child is born, that you are the parents, not the person who gave birth, not the person who supplied eggs or sperm, etc. This is a little funny or challenging, but I tell LGBTQ folks who are in long-term relationships, if you're not married, get married now. You can do it quietly. You don't have to tell anybody. You can have the big party much later in time, but the hope is that any changes to gay marriage won't affect those already standing. That's the hope. Same thing with wills, super intentional. I remember pre-marriage when we were about to have our child, my husband and I had new wills drawn up and they were crazy. The wills specifically were written so that there was no inference of any romantic or marital type of relationship. So apparently we were just two eligible bachelors who never found the right gal and loved to decorate. But get these things drafted as ironclad as possible. A really great attorney said to me, take nothing for granted, go overboard. That attorney, for example, said they put phrases all throughout their clients' documents. Things like, my legally married spouse, Robert, who I was legally married to on June 3rd, 2019 in Ann Arbor, Michigan, is my sole beneficiary. My legally married spouse, Robert, is the only person who shall make end-of-life care decisions. I do not want anyone other than Robert, my legal spouse, to have X, Y, and Z rights. You get the idea. So I think I'll close this section by saying this has been kind of a lot of heavy talk, but we don't need to panic and we should not panic. We certainly hope that massive sweeping new laws will not hit, and they're not going to hit overnight. So we have time to prepare. The reality too is that our rights more likely will just be slowly whittled away by practice, especially in states where this whittling won't be challenged. When that happens, by kind of consensus, it just makes it more and more difficult for us. States may or already are making things more difficult, but there are tools. Be informed. It's the best thing that you can do. And as I mentioned before, so many businesses see dollar signs with our community. So be assertive in this case. Ask questions. How many LGBT adoptions have they done? Estate planning, wills. Take a look at their intake forms, even this with medical care providers. Do their forms say husband and wife or his name and her name? Do they have a clearly stated diversity and inclusion policy? And if they hesitate even for a moment, to me, I say walk away. So in kind of the last segment here is guidance for parents of LGBTQ children. The journey of discovering and navigating a child that is on a pathway to their identity can seem mountainous. It can be frightening. You may be conflicted, or you're 100% on board. But either way, it's good to know what's at stake for your child. Sadly, the suicide rates, particularly with trans youth, are staggering and dreadful. Bullying in schools still very much exists, and oftentimes for our kids, school is not safe or welcoming in reality. And it's also tough for kids, especially the tweens and early teens not being able to experience crushes and have those first dates and being able to be open at the Valentine's dance. Kids have a fear of disappointing their family. Kids and families make kind of nervous cover stories when Aunt Joyce visits and says, "My, Daniel, your hair is very long. People are going to think you're a girl." Or, "Daniel, why don't you have a girlfriend yet?" Those were two, replace Daniel with Darren, and those were two experiences of mine for sure. The grandparent that buys gender correct toys to steer them in the right direction, or they're asked to tone it down at the holidays, or, "Katie, you're my princess, you're my beautiful princess." The coach who says, "Jimmy, don't be a wuss, man up," and everybody laughs. Also, kids are thrown out of their homes every single day. It's not because of who they are, it's because of how they are treated and the lack of acceptance. So I tell parents all the time, the truth is that it's about your kids' happiness. The reality is that it may not look like your vision of what you'd imagined for your kids, and parenting a queer kid absolutely means addressing your own fears, your own biases, and even loss, perhaps when it includes gender potentially changing. But imagine the huge mental health benefits for your child. Imagine what they can achieve when they aren't burdened by fear and rejection, or being made to feel less than. So if you haven't already, decide, no matter how awkward, to be a full-time advocate for your child to ensure their safety in the neighborhood, at school, at church, and in your own home. Speak proudly about your child. Our kids are very forgiving. They love you and they want to please you, but they will also be listening very intently. How you react when you see a drag performer on TV or a movie with gay characters. Talk to teachers, administrators, your daycare provider, pastor at your church. Where do they stand? If there's any discomfort, make a change. Your child is your number one priority. And I know that's not easy to hear. Just a couple other quick things. Young children experiment. You know that. And the more that as parents we can make room for expression and curiosity without judgment, the healthier they're going to be. Your son, for example, who wants to wear a dress, or, that can be very different from the boy who insists, I'm a girl. It's also about respecting their boundaries and honoring them and building their trust so that they know that they can trust your confidence and your support. Sometimes parents go overboard, like with social media. Look at me, I'm a great parent of my lesbian daughter. Perhaps that's not what's best for your child. I'm also often asked, what if this is a phase? I can't answer that. No one can, but suggesting to your child that maybe this is a phase says your feelings aren't valid or you're too young to know. So get counseling. Even if you're supportive and on board, competent therapists provide incredible tools and resources and reassurance. Therapy is not only okay, but it's great for any major life change. And I think the last thing I would say with therapy is that just make sure that it doesn't seem like there's a problem or that they're broken or that our family is broken. Or I'm really trying, but this is really hard for me. This is not the burden to give to your children. And that is it. I know that we are, gosh, we're almost at 2 o'clock, so I think I went a couple of minutes over, but I really appreciate the time to share some of these thoughts with you.
All right, thank you so much, Darren. We really appreciate the work that you do and your willingness to come and share all this information with us, and for sharing your personal story along with it. It's really powerful to hear all that, and I know that's a lot to take in, and thank you for sharing all that with us. We do have a couple of questions and some thank yous in the question box. I do want to mention a couple of things real quick, I guess, before I ask those. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of documentation out there specifically to the LGBTQ+ community and what's currently available in federal benefits. I've done quite a bit of digging around recently, and it's hard to find. In general, my understanding is that there is some coverage. However, it's very limited, isn't available in all areas. But there were a few updates in 2023 to the federal employee health benefits plans, including, I believe, Pride and Federal Service put out some notes on this. So OPM is requiring limited fertility coverage in FEHB plans starting in 2023, and that includes fertility preservation for cancer patients and others with risk of medically induced infertility, and that includes gender affirming patients. And there's a few new plans that will include limited coverage of assisted reproductive technology. It's not available in all areas, it's very limited. But I do have a few articles provided by Pride and Federal Service and some links if folks want to reach out to me. Now we do have a couple of minutes, so I'd love to cover a couple of these questions anyway. So at what point is the first step of family planning, as in when should we get a lawyer?
Great question. My suggestion is that is a perfect first thing to do. Find an attorney who is familiar with LGBTQ family planning and who is also familiar with your jurisdiction and can help you guide the process along the way. And oftentimes after that initial meeting, you can, put them in the back corner for a while you're pursuing the options of creating a family and like that. But I suggest, especially in this climate, that's a great first place to go.
Okay. Next question is about, I guess, can you talk a little bit about embryo donation? And I think with a focus on potentially who holds rights and what legal challenges that might bring up.
I can talk a little bit about that. I am not an expert in assisted reproductive technology. However, it varies from state to state. And while it's getting better, it is somewhat an unregulated journey. The thing to bear in mind is that, in most every case, the person who gives birth to your child will be the parent listed on that birth certificate. And, you can just imagine how fraught that can be. So that's why this pre-birth order is so vital. And oftentimes we have trust with the people that we're working with our sperm donor or with the surrogate or what have you, and things can change. And so recognizing very clearly, will this be an open relationship? What rights will the surrogate have, the sperm donor, and getting that signed, in quadruple and is just so important.
And then we're about to end, but just real quickly, do you have any recommendations on how to find queer affirming mental health care providers?
Well, as a matter of fact, I do. Rainbow Families has a resource guide on our website. Just for clarification, it is not an advertising tool. People don't pay us for us to put their information. We screen all of the people. We work with almost all of them, especially for therapists. We have therapists and attorneys. We have really great partners who we trust. And we are just rolling out an update to that directory in the next week or so, and it will have even more. And I think having that integrity and knowing that this is not an advertising platform is really helpful to the community.
Thank you so much, Darren. I think we are out of time, unfortunately. There are a couple more questions. If folks want to reach out to me, you're welcome to. Darren has listed his contact information on the slide that I believe you should be seeing now. So please reach out. I will try to follow up regarding some of the remaining questions. But thank you again, Darren. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today, and look forward to speaking with you again.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for everyone for joining us. Take care.